Welcome to Love What You Love. I'm Julie Rose. I'm insatiably curious about people in the world around us and absolutely in love with passion and unselfconscious enthusiasm. Every other week, I geek out with someone about the thing that they love, and then I share it with you. Welcome back, or welcome. You might have noticed that Love What You Love has a new look, and I'm super stoked with this new logo. It was created by Jonas Ramirez, who goes by My Fancy Fox on Instagram. He's a super talented illustrator, and I'm just over the moon with the result. I'm so happy with it. I also have to shout out my brother Chris, who's a really talented designer, who helped me bring the whole thing to life. So I'm super excited to let you know that we have a merch store now. So in case you want to get that sweet, sweet logo on a t-shirt or a coffee mug or a travel mug or a sticker, check it out. It's at society6.com/lovewhatyoulovepod. And that's Society6 with the number 6. All the proceeds from sales in August and September will go to one of my favorite nonprofits, and those are always linked in the show notes. Okay, on to this week's show. Did you know that professional baseball has been played in the United States since 1869? Yeah, 1869. That's incredible. I'm a relative newcomer to baseball, having started really following my local team, the Giants, only about 12 years ago. But today's guest, Andy Walzack, has been crazy about baseball since he was a kid. First as a tradition with his dad, and then as an adult with his friends, he's traveled all over the U.S. to visit different ballparks. Over 40 and counting. It's incredible. In this episode, we chat about connecting with family and friends, learning more about parts of the country you might not otherwise visit, the worst ballpark ever, how geography influences the game of baseball, the best ballpark food and where to get it, top tips for your first baseball game, and so much more. So find out why Andy loves baseball stadiums, why you might learn to love them too. Hello, Andy. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to talk with you because you do something that is so interesting to me. You visit baseball stadiums all over the country.
That I have. I've done that for probably more than 35 years at this point. So it's been a long, long process with 2 separate different trips.
Oh, my. So it's only taken you 2 trips?
No, two separate groups of people that I've done the trip with.
Okay. I'm like, wow, that's some dedication. Let's start with why?
That is very good. Good question. Well, I think it's just the basis obviously is just in being a very big baseball fan. Something, able to share with my father, able to share with my friends growing up, playing Little League and high school baseball. My cousin Greg, who's also part of this story a little bit in terms of visiting ballparks, just, a language to talk around, and then having, family members from different parts of the country, and being able to visit different ballparks sort of got me interested in sort of the variety of parks. Growing up in the Bay Area, I went to Candlestick and the Oakland Coliseum a lot, but to be able to go to different parks as a young kid, really interested in me in being able to see them all at some point. So that it all is based just in being a big baseball fan. It's just an extension of my fandom.
Got it. So that was another question is, how long have you been a fan? Like, what introduced you to baseball in the beginning?
Definitely my dad. He was a big baseball. He grew up in Detroit, Michigan, and went to ball games with his dad. And in fact, the first ball game I remember going to was when we were visiting my grandmother in Detroit in the summer of 1980. We went to a Tigers game. I never forget it. It was the game eventually got rained out because of the thunder and lightning storm. And the one thing I remember about the game was the thunder and lightning you could see over it. But yeah, so my dad definitely sort of got me into it. And I grew up in Sunnyvale, California, and my very best buddy lived 5 houses down. And we had that common love. We had an older neighbor who really got us into baseball cards. So just kind of it was always around us, and, and playing Little League as well, and just being outside, playing baseball with a tennis ball and a bat and that type of thing. So just having that sort of as the basis, and then having that first experience going to a ball game outside of the Bay Area was really memorable as well.
So you started in Little League. What position did you play?
It was I started as a catcher. and I played catcher all through up until I got to high school. I'm a pretty tall guy. I'm almost 6'4", so I got to about high school, and it was all right. Let's put Walzack at first base. So I became a first baseman once I got to high school. But yeah, it was played Little League, and I played all through high school.
Got it. And so your dad would take you to games. You'd go to Candlestick. You'd go to the Coliseum. What was the, presumably maybe once you got out of high school, you said, hey, I want to go visit all of these stadiums, these parks. Do you remember what that moment was and when you first kind of hatched the idea of going to all of them?
I distinctly remember, and it goes a little bit earlier because, like I said, I have the two separate sort of experiences. So the first experience of visiting ballparks was with my dad. So my parents split up, and he moved to Chicago for business. And it was summer of 1984. I remember it because it was the Los Angeles Olympics, and I spent almost 2 weeks with my cousin in Georgia. And at the end of that trip, my uncle and my aunt, my cousin, he lived in Augusta. And so we drove on our last 2 days there, we drove to Atlanta. We went to a Braves game, went to the baseball card shop, did some touristy things in Atlanta. So we went to there. And then from Atlanta, I met my sister and my dad in Chicago. And there's two ball teams in Chicago. So during that trip of visiting my dad, we went to Wrigley Field and Comiskey Park, two classic ballparks, one built in 1910, one built in 1914. And so in about a week and a half, I'd been to 3 different stadiums. So I'm like, this is kind of cool. I've been to now 6 different stadiums because you add in Detroit, Oakland, and San Francisco. So I remember my dad and I sort of talking about all the different parks we'd been. And then a couple of summers later, my dad had moved again to the East Coast, and me and my sister and my dad did about a 2.5-week trip there visiting him. And we went to Fenway Park, Shea Stadium, and also Yankee Stadium. So we went to another 3 parks. So at that point, there were 26 teams. And by the age of 12, I had already been, I think, about 9 ballparks. Wow. So we sort of, after that, my dad and I sort of hatched a plan. All right, well, let's try to figure this out. So it was then that summer at the end of that trip in 1986, we're like, all right, well, let's kind of figure out if we can get to all of the 26 ballparks. And so between that time and the time I graduated from high school in 1992, we had taken a bunch of summer trips, and we had made it to, heartbreaking, 25 of the 20 ballparks. Yes, the only one we did not make it to, which is odd because it's on the West Coast, was up in Seattle. So we had done trips, in the Midwest, the East Coast, down in Texas. We did a Southern California trip. So it was great. And my best friend Greg, who I said who grew up 5 houses down from me, him and his dad came with us on 2 of those trips. And so it was great. I mean, some of the best, my dad lived away from us for a while there, so it was great to spend time with him and also, share the travel and the experience of seeing, lots of the part of the country people don't really see.
When you're visiting these parks, I'm presuming you're a Giants fan or an A's fan or both.
I'm an A's fan. A's fan. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Okay. I'll still talk to you. So, when you're going to these other parks, like, what's the experience since you don't really have necessarily any skin in the game unless you're going to a divisional park?
That's a very good question. I mean, I think the trips with my dad, it was, again, just hanging out with my dad and talking, and part of the fun was just the road trip of, all right, we're driving from Detroit to Cleveland. All right, where are we going to stop? What are we going to see? What's sort of do in Cleveland? And then sort of, and just enjoying baseball, really. And that's. And the part of the difference, obviously, growing up here, going to a ball game here, it's in the summer, you're wrapped up in sweatshirts and jeans and hats, and going back east, I mean, it's just so much more pleasant. You're in shorts and a T-shirt. When I was a kid, about having my 3rd Dr. Pepper of the night. I mean, it was always a good time. So just enjoying being outside and being on the road and having that sort of, I mean, really, enjoying the Midwest or the East Coast evenings. And with my friends, when we did my trips in the 2000s up until today, again, it was also about, fellowship and friendship and talking and, making friends with the people in our section, and just that social factor of it, just because, we've sort of made it a point. We're all raising kids and being husbands and working professionals. So those 3 or 4 days we're on our baseball trip every summer. It's a time to catch up. And, the baseball's a part of it, but really most of it is just about around being each other and, telling the same old stories and making fun of each other and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So have you been to the same park multiple times with different groups of folks?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So since my dad and I ended those trips in 1992, there was a humongous boom in, I don't know how much of a baseball fan you are, but just in tearing down all the ballparks that were built sort of in the late 60s, early 70s. And it all started, I think, with Camden Yards, really, in Baltimore. And they started to build lots of new stadiums. So I'm kind of looking at my list here of the different stadiums that we've been to with my UC Davis group, and most of them are brand new. There was a couple that I went to with my dad in the 80s, but for the most part, they are, besides from say Fenway Park and Wrigley, most of them, if not all of them, are complete replacements. So it's kind of been fun just to see what the new stadium builders valued compared to what they did in the 60s and 70s, where they're located, what's in the surrounding neighborhoods. Because my memories in the 70s and 80s, it was these multi-purpose ballparks on the side of a freeway with huge parking lots that I remember my dad and I got lost in the Houston Astrodome parking lot. And now all these, new stadiums are built downtown with bars and restaurants and nightlife around it. Just a completely different model than what they did when they were building those parts in the late 60s and early 70s.
Do you feel that the stadiums have lost something because of that, or gained, or is it just different?
Oh, I think 100% gained. I mean, they called them the cookie cutters, and I at the top of my head, like Cincinnati and Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Atlanta, St. Louis, they were all, even Oakland Coliseum and Candlestick, just these big round bowls that they said, all right, we'll fit a baseball team in here. We can do our football team in here, which they were probably better football stadiums than they were baseball, just because of the sight lines and things like that. But now these stadiums were built just for baseball. They limited the capacity from 65,000 down to say 38 to 40,000, so it makes for a more intimate setting. And just the geography where they put them. I mean, they're just in these, like the new ballpark in San Francisco. They built them closer to downtown, closer to public transportation, closer to places where you can hang out before the game and also after the game. Some of them said, all right, let's find a view, so a lot of, like in Pittsburgh, right on the river, and obviously San Francisco, right on the water. So a lot of the stadiums sort of held that part of, well, let's make this not only a great place to watch baseball, but let's make it a place where people can get here at 4:00 in the afternoon and not leave until the bars close at 2.
So how many total have you visited?
I should have done the exact number, but I think it was 25, like I said, in 1991, and we've been to, I think we're at 42 different ballparks right now.
Wow.
Yeah, which just says a lot to the replacements, and we're down to, I think, 7 or 8 we have not been. In fact, there's one that's there's a stadium in Texas that sort of came and went in between, not even going there. So there's definitely been some that have only lasted around for 20, 25 years before they replaced. So there's about 8 or 9 that my Davis group has not been to, that have been replacements for some of the older ballparks. And honestly, they're in sort of cities and areas we don't necessarily want to go to. So when the pandemic happened, we were actually going to go to Seattle, which was our first trip in 2004. We were actually just going to go there again. We looked at the schedule, looked at what were available. We're like, we don't want to really go to Tampa. Let's go to someplace that we've been before that we had a lot of fun. So let's go to Seattle. So that was kind of our decision last year.
Having been to 42 stadiums, what do you rank them in your mind? Are they all so different that they can't be ranked? Do you have a favorite child?
I definitely, in terms of ranking them, that's a very good question. And I was sort of anticipating that question. I was trying to think about sort of the way I rank them, because I try to put them in just sort of I was fortunate enough to be able to go to a bunch of the parks that are, were built and are long gone now. So, like I said, Wrigley Field, Fenway Park, Tiger Stadium, Comiskey Park, Yankee Stadium. They were all built, between the 1910 and 1920s. And so that's the sort of the classic group. And out of that classic group, just sentimentally, I think Tiger Stadium was my favorite just because that was the first one I really remember going to. We went there a lot. And then the other of the classics I really like is Wrigley. You can't beat the neighborhood. The stadium's actually the sight lines and the seating is pretty good. Fenway Park, I hate to say this, I sound terrible, but it's kind of a hard place to watch a ball game unless you have really good seats. I mean, the outfield seats are pretty bad. Once you sort of get up in the first and third base sides, you kind of can't really see the whole field. So you really need good seats to really, I mean, the atmosphere is amazing, but in terms of watching the game, it could kind of be tough. Comiskey Park, where the White Sox used to play, as much as it was as a classic ballpark, it was so run down. And even when I was 10 years old in that summer of 1984, we had gone to a Cubs game like 2 days prior, and then we went to Comiskey. I'm like, Dad, that was quite different because whoever owned the White Sox just did not upkeep it. The old Yankee Stadium was great, and actually the other old ballpark I forgot to mention was where the Indians played. Cleveland Municipal Stadium, which was built in the 30s. And that was another place. We went there in the summer of 87. And I'm kind calling it a dump because it was, and the one thing I remember about that stadium, aside, it was ginormous. I think the capacity was like 72,000. But just smelled like cigar smoke and stale beer. And it smelled like stale beer before I even know what stale beer smelled like. But again, it was doubleheader Sunday. I remember it was the Red Sox and the Indians. There was probably, I don't know, 15,000 people in a stadium fit for 72. But then, 10 years later, going to their new ballpark, Jacobs Field, was amazing. Just the sort of the re-envisioning of playing the ball game. And we went to Cleveland. That was the last trip we went to in 2019, and just a fantastic ballpark, great atmosphere. The neighborhood's amazing. The food at the ballpark was amazing. You tear down the old and you build up the new. And again, not every place got it right, but they definitely got it right in Cleveland.
For these new parks, are you finding that they have changed the way baseball is played, like in the design? Are they bringing in the walls more, or do you find that these revamped stadiums are more friendly to a pitcher versus a hitter, or vice versa?
Oh, definitely friendlier towards the hitters. And I think that they pull, because those multi-purpose stadiums were, again, they were built almost more so for football than baseball, but they were, they had the right field, left field, the power rally center were definitely wider. They also had the AstroTurf, so a lot of the players try to use the AstroTurf to hit the ball on the ground, try to make it a first base. And they definitely moved the fences in more. Again, I think there was a lot of it had to do with more confined space as well, because they were building them in downtown areas, so they didn't have the wide expanses that they did. Plus, I think they thought, hey, we want more offense into the game. So, and so I think that they closed them. I think some of the examples of like Cincinnati, the new Cincinnati ballpark, the new Philadelphia ballpark, the new Houston ballpark, those are all super, Pittsburgh ballpark. They're all really very much hitters ballparks. Whereas before, those cookie cutters were definitely built towards pitchers and guys that could run if you could hit the ball in the gaps.
Has there kind of been an overall change in baseball, the approach to how you even play the game because of this?
Oh, no question. I think you see it every night with, the emphasis on, the home runs and the way the defenses plays. It pays off to hit the ball in the air over the shift that they do in the infield and into whatever, short outfield fences they might have. And the way you build your team too, I think there's still some of those hitters ballparks around, or pitchers ballparks. Obviously San Francisco still is, Oakland no doubt is. The older stadiums, Dodger Stadium is definitely still a pitcher's park. The ballpark in Kansas City, which was built in the early 70s, is still a pitcher's park. And interesting, as you said about Oracle, some of those stadiums that they built a little bit bigger, they have moved the fences in a little bit. I think they did that in Minneapolis where the Twins play. I think they moved those fences in a little bit as it became more and more obvious it was harder to hit home runs, so they moved the fences in there a little bit. But yeah, got another place that's a big pitchers or hitters park is the stadium in Denver, but that has a lot more to do with the atmosphere and where they're at with the altitude being the Mile High City and that sort of thing.
When was the very first baseball stadium built?
The National League started in 1876, so they were playing in I would say ballparks more than stadiums at that time, and professional baseball started in 1869. So it's well over 100 years that they've been playing baseball in ballparks or stadiums. But I think the first sort of super modern stadium would probably be Yankee Stadium, the original Yankee Stadium, which I believe was built in 1923. So that was really the first 30, 40, 50,000 seat stadium that was built, because Wrigley Field, Tiger Stadium, Comiskey, Forbes Field, Shibe Park, a lot of those ballparks, some of them which they still play today, are they look completely. If you look at a picture of Fenway or Wrigley from when it opened, it doesn't even look like it did now. So it was more of a ballpark than a what we'd traditionally call a stadium. But yeah, so they National League started 1876. I think the Cubs, the Braves, the Reds, I think, are three of the only original teams that are still playing from that 1876, and the American League started in 1901. So they've definitely been playing professional baseball for a long time.
Are you only visiting MLB stadiums, or are you also looking at minor league stadiums or historical Negro League stadiums, those sorts of things?
That's a good question. We had the one sort of offshoot we were planning, and that we've sort of been fiddling with, is going to the College World Series, which is played every year in Omaha, Nebraska. One of my colleagues that I work with, he'd been there, and he said, "Oh, Andy, it's great." In fact, they have a brand new facility there that opened, I think, maybe 7 or 8 years ago. But they play there every year, in late June, which is usually when we do our trip. So that's been sort of something that we've sort of thought about. What we've done a couple of times too is gone to the sites of some of the old stadiums. Some of the old stadiums sort of have markers of where they were, like where the Twins used to play. In fact, you can see it at the Mall of America out in the Minneapolis suburbs. You can see where home plate was at Metropolitan Stadium, where the Twins played for 25 years. There's actually a portion of the outfield wall where the Pittsburgh Pirates used to play at a place called Forbes Field. It's really cool. It's so a portion of the wall still has ivy on it. It has the marker of 400 or whatever feet where that used to be. There's actually a recreation out in the Cincinnati suburbs of Crossley Field where the Reds played. It's pretty neat. They somehow salvaged the scoreboard that used to be at Crossley Field, and then they built sort of an amateur ballpark that high school teams can play at, junior college teams can play at, summer league baseball teams can play at. Is really neat. So and it was famous for having sort of an incline in the outfield. So they included the incline in the outfield. So we have not gone to any sort of minor league parks, but we've tried. Again, as a former history teacher, I grab all my buddies to these different. I'm sort of the pop culture and history guy. So to fill in the daytimes on our trips, I'm like, hey, let's go here, let's go there. And speaking of the Negro Leagues, Kansas City, Missouri has an incredible Negro League Museum, which is actually right next to I think it's the American Jazz Museum. So it's a really great facility and just fascinating spot to visit. Good history. So again, I always try to drag the guys off to these history spots so they can soak up a little culture, which is always a big deal to me.
There might be folks, I know this is shocking, but there might be folks listening to us chatting who have never been to a baseball game. So can you explain the experience and how you feel when you're at the game?
If you've never been to get the full experience, I really think you need to find a spot, get there early, and watch sort of the crowds arrive. And most of these modern stadiums either have blocked off areas around the ballpark, or there are sort of known spots to go that are where you can get some appetizers or some drinks before the game and just do a lot of people watching. So I always suggest if the game's a 7:05 start, make your way. If you're staying downtown, walk from your hotel to the ballpark. Just soak up the city a little bit. Find a spot where you can preferably sit outdoors, where you can watch the crowd, arrive, go into the ballpark or go to the ballpark. So that I always suggest to do that. And once you've had a couple of drinks or whatever, then make your way to the ballpark. It's always fun to take a big lap around it. Every ballpark is different. Every ballpark is built differently. Every ballpark has its different sort of known food or food specialties or views of the city. So it's always fun to, arrive right behind home plate and make your way, do a lap. And all these modern ballparks have super wide concourses. So it's pretty easy to navigate. The one exception, which is interesting, is Oracle Park, which still has the narrow concourses of a Wrigley Field. But the other newer ballparks have huge wide concourses. So you can check out the food options, and there's always local outlets of the popular food in town. So grab some food, make a lap around. If there's a good view of downtown or of the water, get some pictures. The new stadiums also have, statues of the famous ball players that have played there. So those are sometimes outside the stadium, sometimes they're inside the stadium. So take a picture there. If it's there's all the stadiums have a couple of decks, and so sometimes the good views are from up there. So make your way up to the second deck and see if there's some great views. At Oracle in the city, there's always, if you go to that back behind home plate, behind the home plate area there on the outside concourse, you can get great views of downtown. So there's, take in all of the different areas of the ballpark, and while you're doing that, you can watch a little batting practice and watch the hitters hit, a zillion home runs during batting practice. If you have kids with you, it's harder today than it was when I was a kid, but if you have kids with you, try to get a ball, get a ball during the batting practice, or try to get down low to get autographs from some of the players, and then get good seats. We're all professionals and doing okay for ourselves now, so we've sort of spoiled ourselves with our seats these last probably say 6 to 7 years. So get good seats. I always say behind home plate is always good, so you can watch. You really get a more respect for those pitchers and the hitters trying to bat against those pitchers, because you really can see the movement of the ball. And if you don't get seats sort of behind home plate, I always like trying to get seats maybe in the first 5 or 6 rows of the second deck, because those you get a good vantage point to the game, and so I would suggest those. So those are kind of my pointers. And as the ball game's going along, obviously watch the game. If you have people around you, try to, see where people are from. If they're locals, it's always fun to ask them, hey, where can we go after the game? Where's a good place to have a nice meal the next night? So that's always been what we've done over the years, is make friends with the group I go with. I am not the most gregarious person,
really,
but I have super outgoing friends, and we always end up making friends with people around us, which is always a blast. So talk to people and see what they do for a living. How long they've been going to this ballpark. Do they remember the old ballparks? So we've always done that.
There's nothing like high-fiving a complete stranger over
a
home
run. To go back to your previous question is, what's our skin in the game? We're always rooting for the hometown team, right? High-fiving, we're at the Houston Astros game. All right, let's give a high five for someone, so that's always a good time to make immediate friends and root for the home team. Very rarely have we seen our group. I'm that one A's fan, the rest are Giants fans, and then one Dodger fan.
Ooh.
It's okay. He grew up in Thousand Oaks.
Okay, all right.
Legit Dodger fan. He's not some random place in a Dodger fan. He is from Ventura County, so he's definitely gets a pass for being a Dodger fan.
We'll allow it. So now, when you go to an A's game, so where you actually do have skin in the game, what is your experience? Are you laid back? Are you Are you stressed out the whole time? Like, what's it like for you to go to your hometown game?
I'm a pretty laid back baseball fan. My fandom for football was a whole different thing. I would get a lot more involved in football, but baseball, it's just more pleasant, because there's 162 games, so big picture wise, one loss doesn't mean a whole heck of a lot. So some random, Saturday afternoon in June, it's not going to make or break you. So I always, I have a daughter. I've made her into a baseball fan, which has been great. So, she likes to try to get autographs or get a ball. So we get there early and try to do that. Try to get nice seats at the A's game, and we know the players, so it's fun to root for the players that she likes that have been with the team for a while. And then my wife is a native San Franciscan, so we go to Giants games as well. So I've convinced my daughter to be an A's fan, so that has been a humongous victory in my lifetime. So if we go to a Giants game, she'll root for the Giants, but I'll kind of just, if something big happens, I'll just say seated. I won't visibly root against the Giants. But I'm trying to think of traditions. We live in San Francisco, so it's easy to take BART across the bay to the Coliseum. So that's always been a unique experience rather than driving up there like I did when I was a kid. And the experience is definitely different because when I was a kid, my mom or my best friend's mom, Mary, would take Greg and I to the A's game, to the Coliseum, and those women could not have been greater because that experience was we're getting there before the gates even open to get to the parking lot as the players arrive to try to get autographs. Then we get into the stadium trying to get autographs during batting practice. And then usually it would only be on a weekend, but on a weekend we could convince them to stay after the game as the players would leave as well. So it was we had the greatest moms in the world. Yeah. They would be patient and they would indulge our obsession with getting autographs of mostly the A's players. Occasionally we get some visiting team players. But I have a binder full of autographed A's baseball cards of players probably no one's ever heard of. And it was interesting because once they got good in the late 80s, and I got older as well, it was a heck of a lot harder because they closed off the best areas to get autographs, and the players were legitimate superstars at that time too. So it was, getting Jose Canseco's autograph was a lot more difficult than say Donnie Hill or Bill Allman. So it was harder.
Yeah. Now, do you still have all your cards? Do you still collect cards?
I do. Yes, I do definitely collect cards. It's interesting. Over the years, I've sort of developed. I got back into it probably about 8 or 9 years ago. And as a kid, it was always how many cards I can get. Now I usually try to get 2 or 3 sort of nicer cards a year. But yeah, it's still, the obsession is not there as it was when I was 10, 11, 12 years old. But the experience as an adult is definitely a lot different than going to games as a kid. The trips I've taken as an adult with my friends, it's a whole weekend long of sort of activities and hanging out. A lot different than, the road trips with my dad when I was a kid.
Sure. Now, you said that you have kind of a more obsessive football fandom.
Yes.
Do you have plans to visit all of the NFL stadiums?
As I have been to football games in different stadiums, not nearly as many. I think I've probably been to 5 or 6 different NFL stadiums, but candidly, it's just different. I think football stadiums tend to be pretty similar because obviously, with baseball, there's no designated area of play. So you can have one ballpark with, down the line it's 310, another it's 345. But with football stadium, it's going to be 100 yards with 2 end zones that are, 10 yards each. So most football stadiums are pretty similar. Obviously, the football playing space is exactly similar, and the stadiums tend to be big, large bowls that are completely round, and the seating arrangements are similar, and it's a lot more intense atmosphere. People are really into it a lot more. You'll see a lot more fights at football games, people getting out of control, and whereas baseball, going to a ball game on a summer night is just a lot more again, I'm not making friends with, the section around me at a football game because everybody is too engaged into what is going on. And it's because there's only 16 games, every game means something. So it's a lot different experience.
I'm interested that there's no regulation around the field of play size. So what's behind that?
I do not know the history about it. I mean, the only thing I really can think of is that the way the game was, started was definitely a rural game where, you didn't necessarily, probably played in a field someplace and you weren't going to put up a fence. And plus you really couldn't hit the ball all that far the way the game was played in the late 19th century. So I think having a fence was not necessarily, there was not an urgency to fence in where they was playing because it was such a rural game. And I think once it sort of transitioned to, being played professionally, being played in cities like, Philadelphia, New York, Washington, Boston, and, you're playing in a city and you don't want the ball flying into someone's front yard, it was like, we need to have a little bit of fencing, and they probably just gerrymandered in, the field of play of what plot of land that they had. And those original ballparks that were built in the early part of the 20th century are really a testament to that. And one of the most interesting ballparks was the Polo Grounds, where the New York Giants played, and the Yankees for a little bit. It was a horseshoe shape. So down the lines, it was about 260 feet. And then straightaway center was 483 feet. And interesting enough, they actually had Yankee Stadium had the same thing. There was monuments in center field that were also in the field of play. So, if a ball went out there, it might, clank off, a statue out there dedicated to people. A few of the old time ballparks also had, flagpoles that were in play. So it was definitely, a unique circumstance. So I think, to answer your question, they just jammed in. And I think same thing is true today. They jammed it in where they could get, you look at, Oracle Park as a prime example. And I think that if they build that new stadium in Oakland, it's going to be, they're going to fit it into that super tiny plot of land they have right on the water there at Howard Terminal, to make it, the foul lines will be whatever they can make it.
A big part of the experience of going to a ball game is the food. Which stadium, either one now gone or current, has the best, and which one has the worst?
The best, and I'm going to answer that sort of in two parts. So I sort of referenced this earlier, but one of the things that we've done and we've tried to do in the last, say 10 to 12 years of our baseball trips is each city, aside from having its own, one or two really cool cultural, historical things to visit, also is sort of known for whether it may be a junk food or sort of a ballpark food. And most of those outlets, or most of those restaurants in the city proper have an outlet at their ballparks. Mm-hmm. So a place like Cincinnati is famous or infamous for something called Skyline Chili, which apparently the secret ingredient to Skyline Chili is chocolate. But so we've always tried to find that sort of particular food item. So in Philadelphia, they have the cheesesteaks, Pat and Gino's, the two famous Philly cheesesteak places that are across the street from each other. So they have outlets at their ballpark. Miami is famous for the Cuban sandwiches. In Cleveland, not Cleveland, Milwaukee is famous for its bratwurst. Actually, Milwaukee is also famous for its Bloody Marys. There's in a Bloody Mary in Milwaukee is an entire meal. It's ridiculous. When you have a minute, Google Bloody Marys and Miller Park, Milwaukee, and it's amazing. To go completely full circle there, the best food by far of any of the cities we've been to, any of the ballparks we've been to, is in Kansas City. The barbecue there is we just became addicted to it. We went to Arthur Bryant's, which is sort of the old school, which is right down the street from that Negro League Museum, which was old school Kansas City barbecue. I went to a place called Jack Stack, which was described as sort of the white tablecloth version of barbecue, which was also amazing. There's a place called Oklahoma Joe's, which is just called Joe's now. And I forget which, I think it was Arthur Bryant's that had an outline or outlet in the ballpark. And so, yeah, the Kansas City barbecue food at the Kansas City Stadium and Royal Stadium, and then also in the city was just a culinary experience that everybody needs to have, because no matter where you try to mimic it, it's never been the same than the Kansas City barbecue. So Kansas City is great. The worst, I would say, the worst would be some of those original trips I took with my dad, just because it wasn't. I mean, the items there, it wasn't important to have more than just hot dogs and just really awful hot dogs and popcorn and sodas at the game. So I remember having some super D- meals at that Cleveland Municipal Stadium. The ballpark where the Mets played, Shea Stadium, was not only just an awful place to watch a ball game, but also to eat. The food was really bad there. Those were some stadiums. Candlestick had some terrible food. The other thing each park has, every city now, particularly now in the last, say, 10 years, everybody has an outlet of the local beer. So, so they have their cheap local beer, and then there's also sort of the fancier, more local, more craft beer. So each ballpark will include some of the high end beers there, which is also kind of fun to sort of experience that. You can get your $7 beer, and then there's always the $13 beer. We're in San Francisco, of course. The bad beer is $13 beer. Right. The fancy beer is $17. Right. But all across the country they have the more craft beers that have craft beer scene, which have erupted over the last 10 to 12 years. So those are sort of some of the more memorable. But I always prefer a bratwurst with a lot of mustard. And I'm definitely okay with a C- beer. It just does not have to be fancy to enjoy it.
Obviously, in 2020, you didn't get to go on any trips. So, what is your next big trip that you have planned?
That we actually, I have a little mini family trip. Not mini, it's a major family trip. We're leaving Tuesday, so I'm trying to get my daughter to get to some more ballparks. So she's only been to 3. My cousin lives, the one that lived in Georgia now lives in Boston, and so she's been to a couple games at Fenway. So we're doing a national park trip up north, and we're going to end our trip in Seattle and go to a Mariners game. So with my Davis group that we've started our trip since in 2004, so from 2004 to 2019, that was 16 straight years we went, which is pretty remarkable. Canceled in 2020, we canceled in 21. There's definitely been some emails flying around to see if we can squeeze something in the fall. But we're, again, all in our stages of our lives where it's harder to get away when our kids have activities and things like that. So we're probably going to postpone a second year and go someplace in 2022. We had tentatively planned for a second Seattle trip, but what we try to do, we look at the schedule sort of that last weekend in June and see, what cities we haven't been to get to a start, where we'd like to go, where we don't want to go. So it becomes, the emails start flying around once the schedule comes out in usually late November, early December is when the schedule comes out. And then we start looking at, flights and hotel rooms. The one tradition, which is kind of fun, even though we can all afford our own hotel room, one of the great traditions is all staying in one hotel room, which is, if we have 4 of us, it works. If we have, our group can go from 3 to 7 or 8. So depending on who can go, if it's 8 people, we'll get 2 suites, like I got an MB suites type thing. But if there's just 4 or 5 of us, we'll cram together, and that's kind of the experience of it. So we start looking at hotels. Can we get a nice couple suites? Who's in this year? Who's out this year? It's a good group, and like I said, we pack a lot into. In the old days, not the old days, but we were in our late 20s, early 30s, it was get to a city on Friday, hit the ground running, leave Sunday morning. But now that we're older, we get there. We've added a third night. So now we get there on Thursday night. I always pick, let's say, a nice dinner, not too nice, but a nice dinner on that Thursday night. And then we'll do a ball game. Friday afternoon, we'll, race around the city to see some things. And then Saturday, we'll go to usually it's usually 4:00 on Saturday for some reason over the years, usually a 4:00 game. So we'll always get a nice greasy spoon breakfast, do some more touristy things on Saturday, and then go to the ball game on Saturday and then leave on Sunday, which is always, you ever seen the movie Stand By Me?
Yes.
So I always, when we leave the airport on that Sunday, it always reminds you of that final scene when River Phoenix and Feldman and Will Wheaton and Jerry O'Connell are saying goodbye to each other at the end, and everyone sort of disappears, and we know we won't see each other sort of as a big group again for another year. So, and I'm the one big sentimentalist of the whole group, which is why I'm the ringleader,
right.
and do a lot of the organization. But I always get that sort of empty feeling, and because we've had so many laughs and things. But yeah, it's again, I value those friendships and being able to sort of build it around seeing a different ballpark in a different American city is really a unique and special thing. And again, I love the friendship, but I have to say I do love the different ballparks as well, which is just amazing experience.
Yeah. So you gave some top tips a little bit earlier. Let's say someone just has never been to a baseball game at all. They're not interested in going to another city. They just want to go to a game locally. Should they go to a minor league game? Should they go to a major league park? Maybe they don't know squat about baseball. Like, what would you say to them? How would you recommend they get started with going to a game?
It depends on your location, because I think nothing beats the Major League Baseball experience. So if you live within driving distance of a major league park, I think definitely make that your first destination. But there are so many minor league parks. I think that is something as well, especially, when you're in that, let's say the South or the Midwest or the Northeast, where you can really have that evening experience where you can be out and about and it's warm, it's the summer, the kids are out of school, so you can have a late night out with your kids. I think there's definite value. Most of those minor league teams have been there for decades, if not hundreds of years. Or 100 years, not hundreds, 100 years. So it's an ingrained part of the community. So there's probably a specific tradition. So maybe try to, find a good promotion night at the minor league ballpark. If it's a local little league night, or it's, they have a, fireworks night, or you get to go run the bases after the game kind of night. So if there are can be some perks at those at the minor league parks for sure. But going to a local baseball game, a major league game is great. I would suggest going with someone who is not only knowledgeable about baseball in general, but just about that team and the history of the team. Again, I'm a baseball historian, so I can talk someone's ear off for an entire game, talking about, who used to play here, why this player is important. Here's where this championship happened. Here's where the team broke our heart. Here's where the organization really made me angry. Here's where our team fits into the wider landscape of Major League Baseball history. So, having someone that can provide a little bit of context, and teaching someone how to keep score, I think is all, because looking at a scorebook is maybe not your first experience at a game, but maybe at your second or third game is also kind of fun, because it's like a whole language, trying to all the the lines and the squiggles and the squibbles and the all the little different notations. Is also teaching someone a little bit about the game that they wouldn't normally have while just flipping on the game. And baseball is one of those few sports, I think the one sport which is infinitely better in person than it is on television. The other sport like that is hockey, where it just does not translate on television. So having that atmosphere at a ballpark is not replicable. Watching it on TV, you can see more. You can see more of the field. You can see more of the the subtleties of the game. Like I said earlier about, sitting behind home plate and seeing, you can't really appreciate what a 95 mile per hour fastball looks like until you're sort of behind home plate, or you're down near the bullpen while those guys are warming up, because it is one of those talents which you cannot, I'm an old coach, so it's such a cliche, but you cannot coach someone throwing at 95. So to see that, you really have to appreciate it to see it up close. So I think that's important to see, particularly what it's like to try to hit, and then to see those guys make contact, and how effortless it's come sometimes when those guys really tee up a fastball, square it up, and hit it either a home run or a double in a gap. To really appreciate the hand-eye coordination it takes to hit something that's not only going 95 but is moving, and then what it's like to see a 95 mile per hour fastball followed by an 80 mile per hour off speed pitch, because it just, you watch those guys' knees buckle. It is kind of fun.
Well, Andy, thank you so much for taking so much time and for sharing your passion and your knowledge. This has been so interesting. I've actually learned a ton, so thank you.
You're quite welcome, and I was glad to share my passion for the game and for ballparks, and just the tradition of reconnecting with old friends, and really valuing that time to make those friendships that have been 25 plus years really sort of last, and also with my parents and my friends, and baseball is definitely is able to connect all those different aspects of my life.
I love it. I'll include links to the history of baseball and the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum in the show notes, along with links to Andy's favorite nonprofits, and mine too. Huge thanks again to Andy for sharing his passion with us. Just a reminder that you can find this podcast on Instagram at LoveWhatYouLovePod, on Twitter at WhatYouLovePod, and the website is lovewhatyoulovepod.com. All of the transcripts for Love What You Love are available for everyone on the website, thanks to Emily White, transcription magician and proprietress of The Wordery. If you need transcripts, reach out to her at emilywhite@thewordery.com. The music for Love What You Love is called Inspiring Hope by Pink Sounds. A link to that artist is included in the show notes. As always, thank you so much for listening. Let's hang out again soon.
There's some good in this world, Mr. Fertile. And it's worth fighting for.